Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're continuing with our series of videos to help you play chess better. In today's video, we're going to talk about certain types of moves that are kind of hard to spot, and if your board vision and your tactical vision sees them quickly and accurately, you have an advantage over less, acumen opponents who don't see these things as well. In 2011, there were two books that came out about this. The first one, which covers a variety of hard-to-see moves, and it's a fairly advanced book. I don't recommend it to anyone rated under 1,700 FIDE. The name of the book is Invisible Chess Moves by Niemann and Affek. And the subtitle is Discover Your Blind Spots and Stop Overlooking Simple Wins. One of these types of simple wins occurs all the time, and another book in 2011 named this, and once it got named, it made it so much easier for me to teach. And let me turn to that second book. The second book is called Power Chess for Kids by Charles Hertan. And like a lot of books that are, quote, for kids, it's not really just for kids. It's for anybody who needs to learn this stuff. And on page 99, he describes a type of invisible move which he calls the sneaky pin. He says, learning this trick will make you a tactical tiger. A sneaky pin is a situation where a piece or a key square looks protected, but really isn't because of a pin. Your piece is able to occupy the impossible square for a quick win. I also call this power move tactic an optical illusion pin, meaning it fools your eyes. Finding sneaky pins requires good board sight, so your opponent will often miss them. And what he calls good board sight, we've been calling good board vision, or in a sense, a combination of board vision and tactical vision. So let's take a look at some examples both from puzzles and from games. I made up the following example, which is white to play and not get checkmated. All right, well, black is threatening queen g2 checkmate, so we have to stop that. And it looks like the most obvious way to do it is to play knight to e3. But if white plays knight e3, as Stockfish says, after bishop e4, white could just resign. White's completely busted. So the best way to stop checkmate on g2 is for white to play queen takes g6, checkmate himself. This is what we would call a sneaky pin. Why is it a sneaky pin? Because the pawn on f7 is pinned by the bishop on a2 to the king. So it's not really guarding the pawn on g6. And when the queen takes on g6, the pawn can't take, and of course it's checkmate. So this is a great example of a sneaky pin, and it's very easy to miss these sneaky pins. And I always taught these kind of things to my students, but I didn't have a name for it till Hertan wrote his book. And I said, wow, what a great name for this, a sneaky pin. So you're not attacking the pin piece, you're attacking the square that it's not really guarding. Let's see this happen in some games. There's actually a game that I have in my library where someone fell into a sneaky pin twice in the same game. Let's pull out game number 347. And let's go forward about 33 moves. Okay, so here, black has sacrificed the exchange to get an extra central pawn in the bishop pair. He's doing quite well. All he needs to do is continue his development, maybe play something like rook to b8 or bishop to b7. And he's got a good game. Instead, he sees that this bishop on b5 is a little bit off sides, and he decides to try to block it from coming back to the middle, and he plays c4. White looks at the position and says, hey, that pawn is guarded by that pawn on d5, but that pawn on d5 is pinned to the queen. It's not guarded on d8. I can just take it off. Sneaky pin. Bishop takes c4. All right, let's go forward a little bit here. Another 26 moves or so. Okay, so here black plays queen to d2, and white sets a little trap for him. White plays rook to e2, saying, where are you going to go, Mr. Queen? And the queen doesn't realize that there's a problem, so black makes a mistake again and plays queen b4, And unfortunately, the knight on e8 is not guarded again, which means the pawn on e6 is pinned because of rook takes e8. So white simply plays bishop takes d5, sneaky pin, and he wins the pawn. So that same bishop, 16 moves earlier, captured a pawn on c4, and now it captures a pawn on d5. So black actually lost two central light squared pawns to the same light squared bishop in the same game. Bishop takes d5, sneaky pin. All right, let's take another example. Let's go to game 352. All right, we're going to go to the 35th move here. Forward. Oh, went a little too far. All right, so let's go back a couple moves. All right, so here we go. In this position, black played rook d6. White has a nice 4-on-3 queenside majority going. White plays queen a1, trying to help those pawns come up. And now black says, oh, I can centralize my knight and attack his rook and threaten to fork his rook and his queen with knight to d4. And white says, no, you can't. Your queen's not guarded on e7. So I can simply take the knight on d4, sneaky pin. And if you take back, I can play rook takes e7 and white wins a piece, and then he wins the game. All right, let's go to game 363. All right, and let's go to move 30 or so. Okay, so white is threatening bishop takes e6 check. He's got a pretty good position. Black's got those doubled isolated pawns. Black needs to play something like, king f7 or something like that. Instead, he decides to guard it with the bishop on d5. And white says, that rook on c8's not guarded. That means the pawn on e6 is pinned. And white simply played rook takes d5, sneaky pin, and won a piece. All right, we have another game example. Let's go to game 375. And we'll go up to about move 32. Okay, so here we have a situation where white has a bishop and two pawns for a rook, but he also has the bishop pair and he has three connected passed pawns. So black's in a fair amount of trouble here, but it's still a game. At least it's still a game until black plays his next move, which is he figures maybe I'll block off that d-file with bishop to d5. And by now I'm sure you're getting the hang of it. The pawn on e6, which is guarding the bishop, is pinned to the queen, which is not guarded at all. And white simply plays queen takes d5. You got to watch for, all kinds of Zwischenzugs here for black to move the queen and try to get a check. If black could get a safe check here, he could win the queen, but of course he doesn't have it. So he's just losing the bishop for nothing. Notice if the king was guarding the queen, let's give black an extra move here. Let's say white plays, king h2, and black plays king g7. Well, now queen takes d5 is not going to work, because even though the pawn's pinned, you're giving up a queen for a bishop to win a rook for a queen for a rook, and that's if you use counting, which is my basic tactic for a series of trades, then counting would show that you're going to come in behind if that queen was guarded. I had someone tell me that counting was just analysis, and the answer is, well, all tactics, to some extent, when they don't work, are not tactics. A pin that doesn't win material is not a tactic. A double attack that can be defended is not a tactic. And if you count and you don't win material, then it's just, as you say, analysis. But if you count and it wins material, then anything that wins material is a tactic, so we have to give it a name. So in this case, we're taking advantage of a sneaky pin. And of course, if he takes, counting says that we're going to come out ahead. But if the queen was guarded, then it wouldn't work. All right, let's look at some more examples. Okay, examine. Oops, wrong example. All right, in this example, black has just, let's say, taken a white pawn on d4 with bishop takes d4. But unfortunately, the pawn that's guarding that bishop is not guarded. And white has queen takes d4. And again, black has no good Zwischenzugs here. Let's say he tries to counterattack the rook by getting out of the pin and playing queen c6. White has a variety of moves now that will save the piece. He can play bishop takes e5 check, and if rook takes e5, queen takes e5 check, guards the rook. He could even just move the queen and be up a piece. So counterattacking the rook unfortunately doesn't work, and after queen takes d4, white's just winning a piece. Let's get another example. Okay. All right, this one's a little more sophisticated. This is an invisible move that somewhat takes advantage of a sneaky pin. This is white to play, and the question is, what's white's best move? You know, like all the puzzles here in our video, you can always stop the video, we can pause it, you know, do the puzzle, and then come back and see if you got the right answer. Up to now, we've had some pretty easy sneaky pins. This one's getting a little bit more sophisticated. So the question is, what should white do here? And it doesn't really look like much of a sneaky pin example. It looks more like kind of a normal position. If we count the material, white's up the exchange and a pawn. So it's not like white has any problems, but black, you know, has a pawn on the 7th rank, and he's got a bishop that can attack the queening square. So in a sense, black's threatening a move like bishop to d3, trying to win the exchange back. So black has some play. It's a little too early to resign. How can white put him away here? And again, if you want to stop the video, you can. All right, well, the answer is you can make the kind of interesting sneaky pin move, bishop to c1, attacking the pawn a second time. The pawn is pinned to the rook on b8. Now you could say, well, yeah, but if he takes the bishop, he gets a queen. That's worth more than a rook. The problem is that queen's only going to be on the board for one move. If black now plays b takes c1 queen, rook takes b8 as check. And when black gets out of check, white will just take the queen. And now he's up 2 exchanges and 2 pawns, way too much. Black should just resign. But if we go back, the problem with bishop c1 is it attacks the b pawn twice, and black has no way to guard the b pawn. If he now plays bishop d3, then rook takes b2 simply wins a pawn. Black could try to counterattack the a pawn and play something like rook to b4, but white would be happy to trade off that dangerous b pawn for his a pawn, and then there's really no problem winning the game. So it's a little bit hard to see. It's definitely a sneaky pin kind of move, but here the best move is bishop to c1. All right, you want something a little bit harder that takes a little longer to explain? Let's take a look at the next one, number 388. All right, in this problem, you know, white has played something like d5 attacking the knight on c6, and black has played knight to b4, trying to take advantage of the sneaky pin because the pawn on c3 is pinned to the rook on a1 by the queen on e5. So white can't just take the knight. Let's see, I guess I should bring this back up and take all those lines off the board so you can take a look at it better. All right, so black has tried to take advantage of the sneaky pin, and he's hitting the queen, and the queen can't just go anywhere. If he goes queen b3, maybe black can play knight takes d3. So he's trying to force the queen to go back to some square like d2 or d1. Well, maybe d2. If he goes to d1, maybe queen takes c3. So he's trying to force the queen to d2, and then maybe he could play knight takes d5, because the sneaky pin knight on b4 is double attacking d5 and d3, and white has no moves with the queen that can guard both d5 and d3. So black's trying to do a double attack through this sneaky pin. So the question is, what should white do about this sneaky pin? Has black succeeded in winning a pawn here, or is there something that white can do? And I'll give you a little bit of a hint. The answer is actually a little bit deep here. It's not easy to see. I didn't fully grasp all the things that were going on here. It was a little bit beyond my ken. But once I saw them, I said, hey, this is cute. Let's put it in the sneaky pin video. So again, that's a hint. Take your time, and I won't blame you if you don't see what's going on quite to the very end here. Okay, well, the right move for white now is to call black's bluff and say, yes, it's a sneaky pin, but I'm going to take the knight. And now black has no choice. If he doesn't want to be down a piece, he has to take the rook. And now white plays bishop to b2. Now I saw this far, and I said, okay, white's just winning because when black plays queen takes a2, white will play rook a1, and the queen can't go on the a file. He can't go to b3. He can't go to c4. He can't take the pawn on d5, and he's going to lose the queen for a rook, and white's going to win. But the computer said, not so fast. It's not that easy. The computer says the right move for black is to play queen to e1. This is not a sneaky pin move, but it is an invisible move. You know, we talked at the start of the video about having moves that were invisible moves, moves that were really hard to see because they look like they're not possible. And queen e1 is one of those moves. It's an invisible move. Why is it invisible? Well, let's say white falls for the kind of trap here and just plays rook takes e1. Then black will play rook takes e1 check. The only legal move is bishop f1, and now black will play the famous checkmate combination, bishop to h3. And the threat is rook takes f1 checkmate. And black's threat is so strong that the only way white can give up, can stop the mate, is to play a move like queen to c1. And now black's going to be winning. You know, for instance, let's ask the computer here. The computer says black should just play rook a e8, threaten to take off the queen and then bring the rook down to e1 again, and black's up 16 pawns. If white plays, let's see what his best move is here. If white plays queen e2, then rook takes e2, bishop takes e2, rook e8, pinning the bishop toward the mate again. And the bishop has no moves. If bishop f1, rook e1. If bishop f3, rook checks, and mate. So after c takes b4, queen takes a1, bishop b2, queen e1, white can't take the queen. Well, but what can white do? He's still, you know, he's down the exchange and he's only got, you know, some pawns for it. But what white can do here, this isn't over yet, is play bishop takes g7, winning a pawn and opening up the king. And you might look at that and say, what's that got to do with anything? Well, the problem is that if black says thanks for the free bishop, now white can play rook takes e1. And when black plays rook takes e1 check and white plays bishop f1, black can play bishop h3, but white has queen c3 check, winning the rook and winning the game, so that bishop h3 is a blunder. So let's go back and see this again. This is very tricky. C takes b4, queen takes a1, bishop b2, queen e1, and now bishop takes g7. And now black has nothing better than to try to save his queen. He can play queen e2. White can guard his bishop with queen c3. Now white has a pawn and the bishop pair for the exchange, which is usually about equal. Plus, he's got black's king exposed. And here, Stockfish 10 says the evaluation of the position is 0, 0, 0. So if we go back to the very start, if white makes any move other than to take the knight, let's say he plays his second best move. Let's show you the analysis here. If he plays his second best move, queen to d2, then after knight d5, black's better. The only way white can get equality here is to take the knight, let him take the rook, try to trap the queen, let the queen go to e1, and now he has to find bishop takes g7. It's the only move. And black has several different moves he can play here. Stockfish thinks queen e2 is about as good as any. He could also play queen takes b4. And here then white could play something like bishop h6 with a very slight advantage. Okay, so no wonder I didn't figure this out. But it all started with black trying to do a sneaky pin. And it turns out white can call his bluff and say, yes, it's pinned, but I'll take it anyway. And then we have to see not only that we're not trapping the queen here, that black has this wonderful invisible move, queen e1, which is not a sneaky pin, but it does take advantage of tactics to save the queen, and now white has to find this move, which is also hard to find, in order to maintain equality. So both sides have to play very, very clever with a bunch of sneaky pins and invisible moves in order to keep the game balanced. All right, let's do one last time. If you say, yeah, this is all nice, but except for that last example, good players would never fall into this kind of stuff. Let's look at today's World Cup game with Iranian against Avashir Legrave as white against Iranian. So let's pull that up, examine. Guess it would help if I had a place to type. Examine World Cup 19%, 314. Okay, so here's today's game. It's played at a relatively fast rate, 25-10. And let's go forward 30 moves. So black has just played queen takes e3 check. Black has sacrificed the exchange. And he has white's king exposed, and white plays king h2. And now it's sort of black to play and win with perfect play. Well, in the game, Iranian, who had 11 minutes left, played the move queen e2 check, forcing the king to guard the rook. He then took the pawn on d3, and he has a pretty good position, but a few moves later, he falls for a basic tactic. He plays queen d2 check, king g1, plays queen back there, king check, king h2. He plays h5, queen d1, and now he misses. He's all the way down to 250, and he misses the threat. He plays h4, and white gets a skewer with rook to f3. All black can do to save a piece is to trade off into a dead-lost endgame, and poor Mr. Iranian, who was winning the game, completely loses the game. But if we go back to that position where black plays queen e2 check on the 30th move, right here, 31st move, the computer says that black can win, but in order to win, black has to find a sneaky pin. Can you see the sneaky pin that would win the game for him? Or at least give him a winning attack? Well, the answer is, the move that Iranian missed is knight to e4. Let's show you the computer analysis again. I'll move it up. So Stockfish says knight e4 is minus 4.6. And if you check first and then play knight e4 on the next move, it transposes to the same thing. So let's go back. And if he plays queen check, he has to transpose back to the knight e4 line in order to win. So let's go back and force knight e4. Take back the move. Take queen takes e3 check. King up. And now let's force knight e4. Let's show you what might happen if he had found that. Queen to a2 is the number one move. Then queen g3 check. King h1. Queen h3 check, hitting the rook so he can't put the queen in the way. King g1, queen e3 check again, king to g2, queen to g3 check, king to h1, and now just queen takes d3, for instance, threatening knight g3 check. And the knight and the queen are really monsters. The knight's actually better here than the rook, and you can see that Stockfish 10 has black leading by 8 pawns. So he's got lots of ways to win the game. He doesn't need to find just any one sequence. Once he sees the sneaky pin, he's got a tremendous game. So if we go back again to that position, this is where Iranian could have used the sneaky pin to get his knight into the attack. Instead, he brought the knight into d3, which is not nearly as good a square as e4. And even though here he's better, the computer says minus 0.3. Minus 0.3 is nothing like minus 4.5. Okay, so today we talked about the idea of invisible moves, which are moves that are hard to spot. We actually saw a couple of invisible moves that were not sneaky pins. But the main idea of today's video was to introduce you to Charles Hertan's wonderful phrase, sneaky pins. And the name of the book is Power Chess for Kids. He introduces the one I read you is page 99. It's a good book for, that kind of tactics. And I really appreciate Hertan coming up with that name. Just like I've invented some names, I've come up with Hope Chess and counting and a two-way bishop. And I have a few terms that I've created in order to explain things like, if someone uses principles instead of analysis and analytical positions, I call that hand waving. I come up with terms. Well, Charles Hertan came up with the term. He came up with sneaky pin. I love it. I use it all the time. And I tip my hat for him. In today's video, we saw a variety of sneaky pins in puzzles, in games, in amateur games, and here even in a top grandmaster game. So this idea of sneaky pin comes up quite often. It's not a rare idea. It's much. Let's say we taught the video a couple days ago on Lucena and Philidor, rook and pawn endgames. Well, they come up maybe a couple times a year. Sneaky pins come up a lot more often than that. So they're really good idea to know, to recognize, and you can win a lot of games, especially if you're playing speed chess with your friends and you notice the sneaky pins. Very often that's a good way to win the games. And hopefully you don't miss them for yourself or your opponent when you're playing the slow games. All right, for my YouTube series, this is Dan Heisman. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.